the road to nowhere. Sometimes, the most familiar roads hide the darkest secrets. A quiet drive through the night can turn into a nightmare you never saw coming. This is a story about a lonely highway, a relentless pursuer, and a journey that leads nowhere, except deeper into fear. Buckle up. You may never look at a night drive the same way again. The night was dark and silent. I sat behind the wheel of my old sedan, gliding along a deserted highway that wound between hills and forests. The clock on the dashboard read 1:12 a.m. There were no streetlights, only thick fog creeping along the asphalt like a ghostly blanket. The headlights barely lit a few feet ahead, making the road dissolve into white emptiness. This road always seemed endless. I'd driven it hundreds of times, heading home after late shifts. But tonight was different. Something unsettling hung in the air. It was as if the night itself was alive, watching me, hiding in the fog. My right hand rested on the steering wheel, my left on the cold plastic armrest. I tried to focus on the road, but with every mile the anxiety grew. The wind lightly rustled the bare branches lining the road, and each creak sounded like a muffled scream. I turned on the radio, hoping to break the oppressive silence. Static crackled through the speakers. I flipped through the stations, but all I got was a wall of noise. "Damn it," I muttered, switching it off. The silence returned, heavier than before. It pressed on my ears like a weight I couldn't shake off. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. One moment the road behind me was empty. The next, a blinding pair of lights glared into my eyes. The car was approaching fast, its headlights unnaturally bright. I squinted, trying to make out the vehicle through the fog. It looked old, like something from the 70s. Its chrome bumpers gleamed faintly in the headlights' glow, and the body was coated in rust and grime. But what disturbed me most was the fog clinging to it, swirling around the car as if it had a mind of its own. I eased off the gas to let it pass. Instead, it slowed down, staying directly behind me. The headlights filled my car with a cold, piercing light. My heart pounded. My fingers clenched the wheel until they turned white. "Come on, just pass me," I muttered. But the car didn't pass. It followed me like a shadow. Minutes passed, and I decided to speed up. I pressed down on the gas pedal. The speedometer climbed. 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. But the car behind me didn't fall back. It stayed right on my tail, like it was tied to me with an invisible thread. Through the fog, I noticed something impossible. Its wheels weren't touching the ground. The car glided above the road, leaving no marks on the wet asphalt. "This can't be real." A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe I was dreaming, maybe exhaustion was messing with my head. But everything felt too real. The sweat on my palms, the thud of my heart in my ears, the cold air seeping through the car doors. Suddenly, the headlights went out. I blinked in disbelief. The road behind me was dark again. Relief washed over me. But it didn't last long. To my right, the headlights flared up again. The car hadn't disappeared. It was now floating alongside me. Its wheels hovered inches above the ground, gliding like a ghost. I turned my head to see the driver, a dark figure slumped behind the wheel. Its face was hidden in shadow. My mouth went dry. I jerked the steering wheel to the left, swerving into the oncoming lane. There was no one there, just an empty road stretching into the fog. The fog thickened even more. My headlights barely cut through the white wall. I slowed down, afraid of driving off the road. Then, the engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered off. My car stalled in the middle of the road, swallowed by the fog. "Come on, start," I whispered, turning the key in the ignition. The starter groaned, but the engine wouldn't catch. Silence closed in. Even the wind was gone. All I could hear was my ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Wet, heavy footsteps approaching through the fog. Slap. 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 Someone was coming closer, each step slow and deliberate, like they were dragging something behind them. I froze. My hand trembled on the door lock, making sure it was still closed. Shapes began to form in the fog, shadows. They stretched and twisted, taking the form of people. There were 5, 10, 20. They stood on the road surrounding my car. Their faces were blank. They moved slowly, like ghosts risen from ancient graves. I could see their silhouettes through the windshield. Their bodies were all different. Men and women, tall and short, thin and full, dressed in worn-out suits, tattered dresses, and old work overalls. But they all shared one terrifying trait. Their faces were smooth like polished stones. No eyes, no mouth, just pale emptiness. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It felt like they were looking directly at me, even without eyes. Fear gripped my body. Cold sweat trickled down my temples. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. Slap, slap, slap. The footsteps grew louder. One figure approached the driver's side window. It leaned down, its blank face inches from the glass. My hand reached for the door handle, but I froze, too terrified to move. The figure raised its hand and tapped on the window with its knuckles. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was soft, almost polite, like a stranger asking for help. But every instinct screamed that opening the door was the worst thing I could do. "Go away," I whispered, barely audible. The figure knocked again, this time harder. Tap, tap, tap. The glass shook under the force. The other shadows started moving in closer, tightening the circle around my car. I tried the ignition again. The key turned, but the engine was dead. The battery was drained. I was trapped. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I grabbed it with shaking hands. A message from an unknown number. "Open the door." My fingers trembled. I stared at the screen, my fear growing with every heartbeat. Number I won't open it. The phone buzzed again. They're waiting. Figures began to take shape in the mist. They emerged slowly, their outlines wavering. Men, women, some tall, others short, but they all shared the same terrifying trait. Their faces were blank, smooth, pale skin stretched where eyes, noses, and mouths should have been. Just emptiness, as if their identities had been erased. Their bodies were draped in old, tattered clothes, business suits, dresses, overalls, but the absence of faces made them all the same. Hollow, inhuman. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, cold sweat soaking the back of my neck. They stood still, a silent army of shadows watching me. How they could see without eyes, I didn't know, but I felt their attention, a pressure that tightened around my chest. Then, one of them stepped closer. Slap, slap, slap. The wet footsteps echoed through the silence. The figure approached the driver's side window, its featureless face just inches from the glass. A pale hand slowly lifted, fingers curling into a fist. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was soft at first, like a polite knock, but it grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. The glass shuddered under the force. My entire body screamed at me to run, to get out of there. But my hands were frozen on the wheel, my legs too weak to move. Then, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I tore my gaze from the window and glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. Open the door. My hands shook. My heart thundered in my ears. Number no way. The phone buzzed again. They're waiting. I looked up. The figures had closed in, their blank faces pressing against the windows, their hands smearing the glass with cold, pale prints. Their presence was suffocating, a wave of dread that threatened to drown me. Without thinking, I grabbed the phone and hurled it onto the floor. The screen cracked, but the messages remained, glowing faintly in the dark. "Open the door." I shook my head, teeth chattering. "No, I won't." Suddenly, all the figures turned in unison. Their heads swiveled toward the road ahead, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The silence grew deeper, heavier. Then, without warning, they began to part, making a path through the fog. I followed their gaze. Headlights appeared in the distance, faint at first, then growing brighter. The engine of the ghostly car rumbled softly as it glided forward, its wheels still hovering above the ground. It stopped a few feet away, its headlights cutting through the fog, blinding me. The driver's door creaked open. A figure stepped out. My breath caught in my throat. It was me. Or rather, it looked like me. The same face, the same clothes, the same terrified expression. But something was wrong. Its eyes were cold, hollow, devoid of life. A twisted smile curled its lips, a mockery of comfort. It walked toward my car slowly, deliberately, the fog swirling around its feet. The faceless figures melted into the mist, disappearing as if they'd never been there. My doppelganger stopped just outside my window and leaned down, staring at me with those empty eyes. It raised a hand and knocked on the window. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't breathe. My entire body was locked in place. It spoke, its voice a cold whisper, my own voice, twisted and hollow. "You weren't supposed to stop." Before I could react, its hand passed through the glass, cold fingers closing around the steering wheel. A wave of icy pain shot through me and I screamed, trying to pull away. But its grip was like iron. My muscles wouldn't respond. The wheel turned sharply to the right. The engine roared to life. The car jerked forward, tires squealing as they skidded on the slick asphalt. My hands clutched at the wheel, trying to regain control, but it was no use. The fog closed in, the road vanishing beneath me. For a moment there was nothing. No sound, no light. Just cold, white emptiness. Then shapes began to emerge, twisted trees, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. A narrow dirt path appeared, leading to a small, decrepit cabin. The windows glowed faintly with an eerie yellow light. The car rolled to a stop on its own. The engine sputtered and died. I sat there, trembling, staring at the cabin. My phone buzzed one last time. A single message appeared. "You're home." The cabin door creaked open, revealing only darkness inside. The air felt heavy, like the fog had settled into my lungs. A voice whispered in my mind, my own voice. "Come." My hand reached for the door handle, moving on its own. My fingers closed around the cold metal. The door clicked open, the night air rushing in, colder than death. I stepped out, and the door shut behind me. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that sent shivers down my spine. The cold air pressed against my skin like a suffocating blanket. I stood there, staring at the cabin, an ancient, forgotten structure with warped wooden walls and windows that glowed like eyes in the dark. The fog seemed thicker here, swirling around the cabin like it was alive, a sentient force guarding whatever secrets lay within. My feet felt like they were made of lead, but they moved forward anyway. Each step toward the cabin was slow, deliberate, as if my body no longer obeyed my mind. My breath fogged up in front of me, each exhale sounding louder in the oppressive silence. The porch creaked under my weight as I climbed the rickety steps. The door was slightly ajar, and the yellow light from within spilled out in thin, flickering beams. I didn't want to go in. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run into the fog and never look back. But I couldn't. A force stronger than fear pulled me toward the darkness beyond the door. My hand reached out, trembling, and pushed the door open. It swung inward with a groan, revealing the inside of the cabin. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and something else. Something metallic, like rust or blood. I stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind me. The light came from an old kerosene lamp sitting on a table in the center of the room. The flame inside it sputtered, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. The room was sparse, just a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a faded rug covering the warped floorboards. On the table, there was something that made my blood run cold. A mirror, an old, cracked mirror in a tarnished frame. But it wasn't the mirror itself that terrified me. It was what I saw reflected in it, not me, or rather, not just me. My reflection stood there, staring back, but behind it, shadows moved, silhouettes of people, their faceless forms barely visible in the gloom. And then, the reflection smiled, a twisted, knowing smile that sent a spike of dread through my heart. I took a step back, my legs trembling. The reflection didn't move. The shadows behind it grew clearer. They pressed closer, like they were trying to escape the glass. My reflection's eyes, cold, hollow versions of my own, met mine. And then it spoke. "You never left." The voice was mine, but it was wrong. Flat, emotionless, like a recording played at half speed. "You've been here all along." I shook my head, sweat beading on my forehead. No, that's not true." The reflection's smile widened. "Look around." I turned, my heart hammering in my chest. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. The walls seemed to stretch and warp. The shadows in the corners grew darker, deeper, until they were voids, black holes that threatened to pull me in. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, but they weren't my hands anymore. The skin was pale, smooth, featureless. I stumbled back, crashing into the table. The lamp wobbled, its flame flickering wildly. The voice in the mirror whispered again, "This is where you belong." The fog began seeping into the cabin through the cracks in the walls and floorboards. It curled around my legs, icy tendrils wrapping tighter, pulling me down. I looked into the mirror one last time. My reflection was gone. In its place was the dark figure from the ghostly car, its hollow eyes fixed on me. The faceless figures surrounded it, their blank heads tilting in unison. They raised their hands and pointed at me. I opened my mouth to scream, but the fog rushed in, filling my lungs, choking me. Everything went cold. Everything went dark. When I woke up, I was back in my car. The engine was running. The fog was gone. The sun was rising, casting a soft golden glow across the empty road. I blinked, disoriented, my head pounding. Was it a dream? A nightmare? I looked around. The highway stretched ahead, normal and unthreatening. Birds chirped in the distance. The trees were still. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. But then I saw it. In the rearview mirror, the ghostly car. It was parked a few feet behind me, its headlights off, its windows dark. And in the driver's seat, someone sat slumped forward. I couldn't see their face, but I didn't have to. A message buzzed on my phone. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The screen showed just 2 words: "Keep driving." I put the car into gear, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. But deep down, I knew, no matter how far I drove, no matter how fast I went, I'd never really leave. Because some roads don't have an end, and some nightmares never let you wake up.